On a cold December night in 1968, on the deserted Lake Herman Road in Vallejo, California, a horrifying event occurred, marking the appearance of one of the most mysterious serial killers in American history. The victims were Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, two innocent teenagers enjoying their first date. It was a story that has been told and retold, but few know that there were things even more terrifying, things that cannot be explained by science, that emerged from that night. In 2003, at the Vallejo Police Department, Detective Alex, whose name has been changed, a young officer assigned to review cold cases. Among the old and dusty files, he found the Zodiac killer case. Alex had heard of Zodiac, but had never delved deep into it. He began reading the Lake Herman Road case file. Page by page revealed details of that fateful night. Two teenagers, a bullet-riddled car, bodies lying on the cold ground, moonlight, silence, and gunshots tearing through the night. As he read the crime scene photos, Alex felt a shiver run down his spine. Not just the horror of the crime, but also a strange unease from the photos themselves, as if something evil was still lingering there. Alex decided he would go to Lake Herman Road to see the crime scene firsthand. When he arrived there late one afternoon, the atmosphere at Lake Herman was eerily deserted and silent. The late afternoon sun shone down on the trees and bushes, creating bizarre long shadows. Alex walked to the parking lot area, where David Faraday was found. He stood there, trying to visualize the horrifying scene that had occurred. Just then, Alex suddenly felt a cold draft engulf him, much stronger than any cold draft he had ever felt. The temperature around him seemed to drop unusually. Alex shivered. He looked around. There was no wind. Nothing seemed unusual, but the cold feeling was very real. Then, Alex suddenly heard a very faint sound, like light footsteps on the gravel. He turned his head, but saw no one. However, Alex sensed some presence nearby, a cold and evil presence. He felt as if someone was standing behind him, watching him. Alex slowly turned around. Nothing, only trees and darkness. But just then, Alex suddenly saw something flit across his vision at the edge of the woods. A blurry figure, lurking among the trees. Alex squinted, looking closer. The figure was very faint, but he felt as if it was two people, standing side by side. Then, the figure slowly faded and vanished into the darkness. Alex stood there, trembling all over. He knew he wasn't imagining things. He had felt the unusual cold, heard strange sounds, and seen blurry figures. Lake Herman, where Zodiac began his bloody journey, seemed to still hold a part of that darkness. And Alex, who was trying to shed light on the mystery, seemed to have unintentionally awakened something terrifying. The haunting from Lake Herman and the blurry figures didn't leave Alex's mind. He knew he had touched something beyond the realm of normal crime. Alex continued to study the Zodiac case file. The next attack occurred in July 1969, at Blue Rock Springs Park, also in Vallejo. The victims were Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau. Darlene died, while Mike miraculously survived, becoming an important witness. Alex read Mike Mageau's testimony. He described the terrifying moment when the second car stopped. The killer got out, shone a flashlight in their faces, and opened fire. The sound of gunshots, screams, and the eerie silence that followed. As he read this detail, Alex suddenly heard a small sound coming from his office window. It was the sound of a flashlight being turned on, a faint light shining into the room. Alex startled and turned his head to look. No one was there. The flashlight beam disappeared. However, Alex sensed some presence right outside the window. A cold and terrifying feeling. He decided he would go to Blue Rock Springs Park. When he arrived there in the evening, the park was deserted and pitch black. Alex walked to the area where the attack occurred, a small parking lot hidden behind the main part of the park. The air here was heavy and gloomy. Alex felt as if he was stepping into a place frozen by time and horror. He stood in the parking lot, trying to recreate the scene of the crime. Summer night in 1969. Two teenagers sitting in a car. Another car stops. Flashlight beam. Gunshots. Just then, Alex suddenly heard a loud sound coming from the distance. In the darkness, it was the sound of a car braking sharply. Alex startled and looked towards the sound. No car was there. Then, Alex heard light footsteps on the gravel. Coming closer, he turned his head, but saw no one. However, Alex sensed some presence approaching. A cold and threatening presence. And then, Alex was horrified to hear a voice echo. A hoarse and eerie voice. Like the voice he had heard at Lake Herman. They will die. The voice did not come from a physical body. It echoed in the air, as if from nothingness. Alex stumbled backward, trembling all over. He knew the Zodiac ghost had appeared again. And this time, he didn't just appear. He was recreating the horrifying moments of the crime. The hoarse and eerie voice continued to echo, describing the attack in detail. Gunshots echoed in the air, the victim's screams tearing through the night. Alex was surrounded by horrifying sounds. As if reliving that fateful moment, he closed his eyes tightly, trying to escape the nightmare. When he opened his eyes, everything was silent again. No more voices, no more gunshots, no more screams. The park returned to its deserted and pitch-black state. But Alex knew those things had happened. The Zodiac ghost had brought him back to the summer night of 1969, making him witness his brutality. And he knew this was just the beginning. The supernatural experiences at Lake Herman and Blue Rock Springs Park confirmed for Alex that the Zodiac killer was not just a murderer. He was somehow connected to an evil force, or his spirit still lingered, causing horror beyond death. Alex continued to study the case, focusing on the attack at Lake Berryessa in September 1969. This attack was particularly brutal, as Zodiac attacked two college students, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, with a knife. Brian survived, but Cecilia died from her injuries. Notably, at the crime scene, Zodiac wore a hood and a bizarre cloak, and he carved a Zodiac symbol onto the door of the victim's car. Along with threats, Alex decided he would go to Lake Berryessa, a beautiful but also haunting location. When he arrived at the Cove Springs area at Lake Berryessa, where the attack occurred, Alex felt a heavy and gloomy atmosphere enveloping the place. The lake water was calm, but had a strange dark appearance. Alex walked along the shore, approaching the site of the attack. He tried to visualize the horrifying scene. Two college students enjoying a beautiful day. And then Zodiac appears, in his terrifying outfit, bringing death and pain. As Alex was standing there, he suddenly felt a cold draft engulf him. The feeling was very familiar. Then, Alex suddenly saw something in the distance, standing under a large tree. It was a tall figure, wearing dark clothes, with a hood over his head. David was horrified. It was the ghost of Zodiac in his Lake Berryessa outfit. The ghost slowly advanced towards Alex, walking softly and silently on the gravel. Alex froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't run away. He had to face him. As the ghost came closer, Alex could see his shape more clearly. His outfit was tattered. The hood hid his face. Only his empty and cold eyes staring directly at Alex. Then, from the ghost, a hoarse and eerie voice echoed, "I like to hurt." The voice echoed in the air. As if from hell, the ghost raised a hand, its long and sharp finger pointing at a nearby tree trunk. Alex looked in the direction the ghost pointed. On the tree trunk, he was horrified to see a zodiac symbol carved. But that symbol was not the usual symbol. It looked like it was carved with a sharp object. And from the carvings, a dark red liquid slowly flowed out, looking like dried blood. Alex knew that was Zodiac's mark, a declaration of his brutality. And the ghost standing there was a reminder of the terrible crime that had happened in this place. The Zodiac ghost stood there for a moment, staring intently at Alex and the symbol on the tree trunk. Then, he slowly retreated, merging into the darkness of the woods and disappearing. Alex stood there alone at Lake Berryessa. Trembling, he knew he had witnessed something beyond human comprehension. The spirit of the Zodiac killer still haunted the places where he had unleashed terror. The terrifying encounters with the Zodiac ghost at the crime scenes had made David live in utter fear. He knew that the killer's spirit still lingered, and he was being haunted by him. Alex continued to study the case, turning his attention to the attack in San Francisco in October 1969. The victim was Paul Stine, a taxi driver. This case was notable because Zodiac killed the victim right in the middle of the city, and then sent a piece of Paul Stine's blood-stained shirt along with a threatening letter to the police. What made this case even more chilling was that witnesses saw Zodiac right after the murder. But he vanished into the darkness. Alex decided to go to the Presidio Heights area in San Francisco, where Paul Stine was murdered. San Francisco is a vibrant and crowded city. But when Alex went to the Presidio Heights area in the evening, he felt a strange and gloomy silence. This area was filled with luxurious houses and quiet streets. Alex walked along Washington Street, approaching the spot where Paul Stine's taxi had stopped. He stood there, trying to visualize the horrifying scene that had occurred, an innocent taxi driver murdered in his own car. As Alex was standing there, he suddenly felt a cold draft engulf him. The feeling was very familiar. Then, Alex suddenly saw something in the distance. At the end of the street, it was a blurry figure, wearing a dark cloak, with a hood over its head. David was horrified. It was the ghost of the Zodiac killer. The ghost slowly advanced towards Alex, walking softly on the asphalt road. Alex froze. He knew he couldn't run away. He had to face this ghost in the very place where he had unleashed his last terror. As the ghost came closer, Alex could see his shape more clearly. Dark outfit, hood hiding his face, only his empty eyes staring directly at Alex. Then, from the ghost, a hoarse and eerie voice echoed, "I am everywhere." The voice echoed in the air, as if coming from the very darkness of the city. The ghost raised a hand, its gaunt finger pointing at a nearby building. Alex looked in the direction the ghost pointed. It was an old post office building. Alex suddenly remembered. Zodiac had mailed some of his letters from post offices in San Francisco. Amy understood. The Zodiac ghost was trying to tell him something about the letters, about the messages he had sent. The ghost slowly retreated, merging into the darkness of the street and disappearing. Alex stood there alone in Presidio Heights. Trembling, he knew that the Zodiac ghost didn't just haunt the crime scenes. He haunted the entire city, even the places where he had sent his deadly messages. And Alex knew that his journey to solve the mystery of Zodiac had entered a new phase. A phase involving cryptic messages and the evil force behind him. After the terrifying encounters with the Zodiac ghost, David realized that he was not just a simple killer. He was connected to some force. An evil force that was either using him or being controlled by him. Alex focused on the letters and ciphers that Zodiac had sent. He believed that within them lay the key to understanding the killer and the evil force behind him. He spent many hours reading and rereading the letters, trying to find hidden clues in Zodiac's insane and arrogant words. He also tried to decrypt the remaining ciphers. One night, as David was sitting in his apartment, re-examining a copy of the Zodiac 340 cipher, a cipher that had never been completely solved, he felt a sudden cold draft engulf the room. Then, David suddenly heard a faint voice echoing from somewhere in the room. The voice sounded like rustling paper, accompanied by very faint whispers. Alex shivered. He knew that voice was related to Zodiac. The faint voice came from the copy of the cipher on David's table. David was horrified looking at the paper. The symbols in the cipher seemed to be moving, changing strangely, and from those symbols, the whispers echoed, sounding very weak and hard to hear, like the wind whistling through a narrow crack. David tried to listen more clearly. The whispers sounded like disjointed words, strange sounds. In the whispers, David heard a few words repeated: heaven, slave. David felt a chill. He remembered the message he had decrypted from the 408 cipher, where Zodiac said that the souls of his victims would be his slaves in paradise. Perhaps, the whispers were the voices of the souls trapped by Zodiac. David felt as if he was hearing voices from hell itself. The whispers grew louder, and the room became colder. The symbols in the cipher moved faster, as if coming alive. David felt as if he was being sucked into that cipher, into the evil world that Zodiac had opened. He tried to back away, wanting to escape from this terrifying room. But just then, the dark shadow reappeared, standing in the corner of the room, staring directly at David. And from the dark shadow, a hoarse and deep voice, full of evil, echoed. They are speaking. David knew that the dark shadow was the evil force related to Zodiac, and it was communicating with him through the cipher and the trapped souls. The hoarse voice continued, "They want release." David understood. The souls trapped in the cipher were begging for release. And perhaps, the only way to free them was to completely solve the mystery of Zodiac and the evil force behind him. The voice from the dark shadow, the evil force related to Zodiac, "They want release," echoed in David's mind. He knew he was hearing the voices of the souls trapped by Zodiac. David felt a strong urge. He had to completely solve the mystery of Zodiac, not just to expose the truth about the killer, but also to free the suffering souls. He focused on the 340 cipher and the remaining ciphers. He believed that in these ciphers lay the key to understanding the world that Zodiac believed in and how he trapped souls. While researching, David frequently saw strange phenomena. The dark shadow still appeared, but now, sometimes, he also saw other blurry figures appearing around the dark shadow. These figures were very faint, but David felt as if they were young women and one man. Zodiac's victims. Their faces were distorted and full of pain. David knew these were the souls of the victims, trapped by Zodiac and the evil force. One night, as David was researching the attack at Lake Berryessa, He suddenly saw the zodiac symbol with the teardrop indentation on the crime scene photograph. Just then, a sudden cold draft engulfed the room. Stronger than ever before, the dark shadow appeared, and around it, the blurry figures of the victims also appeared. More numerous than before, they stood there, looking at David with empty eyes full of pain. And from those blurry figures, David heard moans, cries, and faint whispers, all begging for one thing: release. David felt his heart being torn apart. He knew these souls were suffering horrific torture. He looked at the dark shadow. Perhaps that was the main captor. Perhaps it wasn't the spirit of Zodiac, but the evil force that he worshipped or was connected to. David said to the dark shadow, Who are you? Did you trap these souls?" The dark shadow didn't say anything. It just stood there, looking at David. Then, one of the blurry figures of the victims slowly stepped out from the group. It was a young woman. Her face distorted and covered in blood. Just like the blood-faced ghost Amy had seen at Epcot, in another story. She stood there, looking directly at David, her empty eyes full of pain. From her mouth, a whisper echoed, clearer than ever. "He trapped me." "Here." She raised a blurry hand, her gaunt finger pointing at the dark shadow. David understood. That evil force was the one who had trapped the souls of the victims. And perhaps, Zodiac was just a tool. A guide for this force. The ghost of the young woman slowly raised a hand, her finger pointing to her chest, right at the location of her heart. From there, a faint light emanated, dark red, like blood, and from that light, David heard her faint voice, "The pain is still here." David shivered. The pain of the victim still existed, trapping their soul. The faint voice of the victim's spirit, "The pain is still here," echoed in David's mind. He knew that the victim's spirit was trapped by the very pain and horror of death. And the evil force that Zodiac was linked to wasn't just imprisoning them. It was also feeding on that pain, turning the souls into its slaves. David looked at the dark shadow, the captor of souls. He believed it wasn't Zodiac's spirit. It was some kind of evil entity. A demon. He remembered the message from the 408 cipher, where Zodiac talked about paradise and slaves. Perhaps, Zodiac wasn't going to paradise with the souls. He was offering the souls to this demon. David felt a strong determination. He had to do something to help these suffering souls. He had to break the demon's control and expose the truth about Zodiac and the force he served. He focused on decrypting the remaining ciphers. He believed that within them lay the key to understanding the demon and how to defeat it. While researching, David was often tormented by supernatural phenomena. The dark shadow and the victim's spirits still appeared, causing intense fear in him. Sometimes, he saw horrifying scenes from Zodiac's murders, as if they were being replayed right before his eyes. He heard screams, moans, gunshots, the sound of knives cutting. David felt as if he was living in hell. The demon was trying to terrorize him, trying to prevent him from finding the truth. One night, as David was near Lake Berryessa, trying to sense the energy there, he suddenly saw the dark shadow appear right in front of him. This time, the dark shadow was very clear. It was tall, distorted, and terrifying. Its glowing red eyes stared directly at David. And from the dark shadow, a hoarse and deep voice echoed. Not Zodiac's voice, but the demon's voice. "You will not succeed." The voice was full of threats and cruelty. The dark shadow extended an arm, its long and sharp finger pointing towards David. David felt as if he was being pulled towards the demon by some invisible force. He screamed, trying to resist, but he had no strength. Just then, the blurry figures of the victims appeared around the demon. They stood there, looking at David, their eyes still full of pain, but with a glimmer of hope. And from those figures, David heard faint whispers, "Help us." David knew he couldn't give up. He had to fight for these souls. He focused all his will and energy, resisting the demon's pull, and he said, his voice trembling, "I will not give up. I will expose the truth." The demon roared in anger, the roar echoing throughout Lake Berryessa. The demon roared in anger, trying to pull David towards it. However, David resisted, empowered by his will to free the suffering souls and expose the truth about Zodiac. He focused on the 340 cipher and the other ciphers. He believed that the solution to these ciphers was not just Zodiac's identity, but also how to defeat the demon and free the trapped souls. In that decisive moment, as the demon was trying to overpower David, he suddenly realized something strange about the 340 cipher. He saw a new pattern. A pattern related to the symbols and the strange sounds he had heard from the cipher. With this new understanding, David began to decrypt the 340 cipher in his mind. Symbol by symbol was decrypted, forming words, sentences. It wasn't Zodiac's name, it was an incantation, a curse, or some kind of ritual. And as David decrypted the last lines, a faint light emanated from his mind, shining in the darkness. That light shot towards the demon, colliding with its evil energy. The demon shrieked in horrifying pain. Its shape cringed, distorted, and began to disintegrate. The blurry figures of the victims appeared around the demon, looking at it with eyes full of hope and hatred. And then, from those figures, a blinding white light burst out, enveloping the demon. The demon let out one last roar, the roar echoing throughout Lake Berryessa, and then, it completely vanished into that white light. When the demon disappeared, the white light also faded, and the blurry figures of the victims also gradually faded and vanished into the air. The moaning and crying stopped. Instead, there was a strange silence and peace. David stood there at Lake Berryessa, breathing heavily. He knew he had done it. He had defeated the demon and freed the trapped souls. However, David knew that the story of Zodiac was not completely over. His true identity was still a mystery. But David knew that Zodiac was not just a killer. He was a tool, someone who had opened the door for an evil force to enter this world. And perhaps, the most horrifying truth about Zodiac is not his identity, but the existence of the force he served. David returned home, carrying the haunting memory and the new understanding of the spiritual world. He was no longer tormented by ghosts, but what he had witnessed and experienced would haunt him for the rest of his life. The Zodiac killer case is still not completely solved, but David knew that he had found a part of the truth, a part of the mystery that is beyond human understanding. And perhaps, only when the entire mystery of Zodiac and the evil force he served is exposed, will the souls who have passed find true eternal peace. If you enjoyed these true horror stories, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on the channel to follow our latest videos. We will bring you more terrifying and haunting stories. Thank you for listening.